Let's talk about today's business matters. Ivanka Trump appeared at the Heartland Summit in Bentonville, Arkansas, her first major public appearance since the end of her father's first term in the White House. She promoted her private business venture called Planet Harvest that aims to expand access to fresh produce. She co-founded the Chicago-based company 2 years ago. The Heartland Summit is an annual gathering of business, philanthropy, and thought leaders put together by the heirs of the Walmart fortune. During President Trump's first term, Ivanka was frequently in the spotlight as a senior advisor. Before that, she worked for her father in real estate and other ventures. An outage cuts contact with an airline at Newark Liberty International Airport. The Federal Aviation Administration says air traffic controllers there lost radar and contact with an aircraft. During the 90-second outage, controllers were unable to communicate with pilots and their radar screens went dark. The FAA said the incident happened just before 4 a.m. Eastern Time. This was just hours after the Trump administration unveiled plans to overhaul the U.S. aging air control systems. And dozens of Airbus and Boeing planes added to the flight board in the coming years for British Airways. Parent company International Airlines Group unveiled the new orders after a better-than-expected first quarter. Here's more.
With profit and revenue ascending in the first part of the year, IAG-owned British Airways is adding to its fleet. The airline group announced new orders with Boeing and Airbus, 32 Boeing 787-10 aircrafts and 21 Airbus A330-900 neo aircrafts. This comes as International Airlines Group beat earnings estimates. Its first quarter profit climbed to about $198 million. Revenue rose almost 10% with growth in passenger and cargo income. IAG said strong demand in its core markets was continuing and confirmed its outlook for the year. CEO Luis Gallego said the group has been working on a new plane deal for a long time. At the same time, though, the U.S. and Britain reached a trade agreement that included Britain buying $10 billion in Boeing jets. The orders add to Boeing's large backlog. The plane maker is trying to ramp up production after a difficult year when output slumped due to a wider quality crisis. The aircrafts are scheduled to arrive between 2028 and 2033.
New customs data released today is showing how the U.S. tariffs have impacted imports from China. The U.S. is at a crossroads with China as trade talks between the two countries will be taking place this weekend in Switzerland, and President Trump is hinting at the possibility of lowering tariffs. NTD's Sean Marshall has the update.
April's triple-digit tariffs on China sent import numbers from the communist nation plunging, a 21% decline from $41.8 billion to $33 billion, according to customs data, an indication of the significant effect the tariff war is having on the Chinese economy. But a new round of psychological tariff warfare started on Friday. President Trump posted on Truth Social that an 80% tariff on Chinese goods, quote, seems right, up to Scott B., meaning that the decision is up to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. It was Trump's first suggestion of a specific alternative to the 145% levies he's imposed on China. His comments came ahead of the weekend talks between U.S. and Chinese officials. Bessent and Chief Trade Negotiator Jameson Greer will meet with their Chinese counterparts in Switzerland for talks that could be the first step towards resolving their trade disputes. Trump administration officials described the talks as a step forward de-escalating tensions with China. Trump said in another Truth Social post, China should open up its markets to the USA. Would be so good for them. Closed markets don't work anymore. After a series of U.S. tariff-induced cancellations, China-based shipping agents have resumed buying container space for goods headed for the United States, just ahead of the upcoming trade talks. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss OpenAI CEO Sam Altman and other U.S. tech leaders testifying to Congress on AI competition with China is Nolan Lee, computer science and technology analyst and author of Quantum Peril. So Nolan, thank you very much for joining us today. Good afternoon to you. And where I would like to start this conversation is I want to get your thoughts on AI. So Sam Altman was saying at the hearing that he sees AI as sort of parallel to the conception of the internet. What do you see AI as?
Yes, I totally agree. AI has the potential to even deliver more value than the internet, especially if we're able to create artificial general intelligence that can be widely applied across multiple industries and problems without custom training and things like that. We have the potential to lower the cost of manufacturing by orders of magnitude with AI. And so you can imagine the costs of everything will go down. We'll have solutions to really hard problems that have eluded us for decades, and it could be larger than the internet.
And as AI gets more advanced, the AI models, can you also talk about the dynamics between risk and where the government should step in to sort of intervene with regulation?
Yes, this is a really tricky topic, especially in the early stages right now. I would say that most of the technology we're familiar with, ChatGPT, Gemini, these are large language models, not exactly AI. These are incredibly huge models that are very intelligent and are good at sorting through large amounts of data, but we're not yet at the point where it's oh shoot, we suddenly have AI, we really need to regulate it. At least not that I've seen. So I think the government needs to be careful about over-regulating at this early phase because we're not yet there. We have a lot to do.
So you were talking about earlier artificial general intelligence, right? And are you concerned at all if we reach that point and beyond, there could be some potential risks to humanity?
Yeah, this is something that Hollywood has chronicled. If you've watched all the movies about AI taking over the world, I think that as long as we do it in a gradual way and make sure that the right players are innovating and putting in safety guardrails, we can stay ahead of it. But it's hard to tell until we actually reach that point.
Okay, that's a good point to segue into my next topic, which is let's talk about China and the race with AI to compete with China. How far ahead is the US and how real is the threat that Beijing could overtake us?
Yes. So we have a head start, and I don't know what the lead is in terms of months or years, but every year AI grows by 5x, 10x. And so if we don't continue at our velocity, it's very easy for an adversary like China and the CCP to catch up within 6 months, a year. We really need to continue running at that high velocity in order to keep that distance between us.
What are some of the shortcomings that the US currently is experiencing in AI?
Shortcomings, I would say the cost to train models right now is still incredibly high. And that was one of the interesting pieces about DeepSeek coming out recently, was that they showed that they were able to train that model on significantly less resources and cost, although there is some debate about the validity of their claims and how accurate their measurements are. But if the US continues to create an environment where it's very costly to find smart people to work on these problems and get the hardware that they need, then the costs will just eat at the economics of innovation, and we would risk losing that lead.
And can you talk to us about what's at stake here? Speak to the threat. Why does the US need to stay ahead of China, right? If the US loses AI leadership, what would be the real world consequences of that?
Sure. So in my novel, I actually write about a hypothetical future, 35 years in the future, where China has advanced in AI to the point where they've surpassed the United States. And I paint this picture for what the world could look like. In terms of military applications, you can use your imagination. AI has the potential to change the battlefield. You can just point it at a system and have it hack into that system and take down massive infrastructure. And I think if we're not careful and China is able to surpass us in consumer and military applications of AI, we could really be looking at a tough challenge ahead.
Okay, can you elaborate a bit on that? So let's say I'm an everyday American consumer, and the US just lost its leadership in AI. China is now the leader. How does that impact me?
Sure. I think in the near term, you'll find that it's actually surprisingly okay. It's pleasant. You'll enjoy new products, new applications. TikTok might understand you a little bit better, but the trade-off is that your data and information about you is trickling into the machine of the CCP. And I think that's the larger risk, is that it's sort of like the devil's bargain. You're taking some benefits from their AI, but giving up a lot of your data, a lot of your potential freedoms, and they're spying on things that you're doing.
And so in the hearing yesterday, Altman also talked about energy infrastructure. What are your thoughts on this? Are we ready for the increase in energy consumption, electricity consumption? Do you believe advancements in energy can actually keep up with AI? Do you feel like potentially energy could be a bottleneck, perhaps, to AI, to innovation?
Yes, so energy is the biggest challenge that I think we have with being able to scale up compute on GPUs and all these data centers around the country. The CEO of CoreWeave, during that testimony, he mentioned they have 250,000 GPUs consuming 360 megawatts of power. And that's enough power to run over 300,000 homes. So if you multiply CoreWeave and you start having companies set up their own hardware at the same scale, you're looking at consuming power at the equivalent of millions of homes across America. And you don't want that power to be competing. You don't want them to be competing for that power with everyday Americans. And that could be a challenge unless they're able to build their own power supplies.
Okay, so if energy is such an important component, I'm just thinking between the US and China, does US have a lead in energy production when compared to China? If so, doesn't that give the US, if it has a lead in energy, doesn't it give the US an advantage?
So China is building new power plants at an incredibly breakneck pace. I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's something like they're opening up a new coal power plant every week or something like that. And I think using conventional, traditional energy, we will struggle to keep up with their rate of energy production. But what nobody is really talking about is the potential to unlock nuclear technology, particularly fusion energy, which could totally change the game in terms of the energy equation.
Okay. So talking about, maintaining the U.S. leadership on China, do you think export controls on advanced chips on China, is that going to give the U.S. an advantage? Is that going to slow the progress of China?
That'll slow things down, but that will also encourage them to look for alternatives and potentially work on their own chips. And it's anybody's guess on if they will be successful. I think it just buys you time and ensures that the United States is always working on the latest hardware, and then China is working on, 1 or 2 generations behind. But it's hard to say. China is a very innovative place, and they're already manufacturing the chips for us. It's not too difficult to imagine that they could reverse engineer some of that technology and potentially build their own chipset.
Okay, let me pose a rather fundamental question here. So Altman was remarking on AI in the US having American values. How are the values in the US when it comes to AI different than China's AI vision?
Sure. I would say in the United States right now, there's a lot of emphasis on responsible AI and making sure that we develop it in a transparent, gradual way so that multiple stakeholders have input, etc. That has its pros and cons. On the one hand, it bakes in a lot of these Western values into the way AI is developed and is a bit more safe. But on the other hand, it can slow down the pace of innovation. And we've already seen that the CCP is totally fine with throwing a lot of these rules out of the window. Just with DeepSeek, I believe they just downloaded all sorts of copyrighted material and trained their model on it, and they didn't care that all of it was copyrighted. And they're willing to step over lines and get to the next generation of AI and kind of break rules to get there. And I think those are the big differences in how we develop AI and how they develop AI.
Well, you know, Nolan, I could probably speak to you about this for another hour, perhaps even more, but for today, we're out of time now. Once again, thank you very much for your time. A pleasure speaking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Top AI executives say the U.S. is leading the global AI race, but warn that lead could slip away without support from Washington. This was during a Senate Commerce Committee hearing yesterday. Here's Senator Ted Cruz.
As a matter of economic security, as a matter of national security, America has to beat China in the AI race. China has made AI central to its national strategy, and China aims to lead the world in AI by 2030.
The number one factor that will define whether the United States or China wins this race is whose technology is most broadly adopted in the rest of the world. This is a global market, and it will be defined as technology markets typically are by network effects. 18% of the people in the world live in China, 4% live in the United States, 78% live somewhere else. The lesson from Huawei and 5G is whoever gets there first will be difficult to supplant.
The Senate Commerce Committee is looking to cut regulatory barriers to meet the challenges posed by Chinese AI development. The U.S. tech industry plans to lobby the Trump administration for more favorable policies, like easing export restrictions on AI chips. Executives say promoting worldwide use of U.S. AI reflects democratic values and is a matter of national interest. Chinese company Huawei also makes advanced AI chips and has faced U.S. restrictions over concerns its equipment could be used to spy on users. The Trump administration plans to change a set of AI chip export curbs unveiled during the final days of the Biden administration. They were set to take effect on May 15th. President Trump signals that he could cut China tariffs ahead of the weekend trade talks with Beijing. Trump said today on Truth Social that 80% tariffs on Chinese goods, quote, seems right. He added, quote, China should open up its market to the USA and it would be so good for them. Closed markets don't work anymore. That's what Trump is saying. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and trade negotiator Jameson Greer will meet Chinese economic czar He Lifeng in Switzerland. The weekend talks in Geneva have been described by administration officials as a step toward de-escalating tensions with China. Lawmakers call for a Chinese robotics company to be blacklisted, citing national security concerns. Democrats and Republicans sent a letter to Pentagon officials this week asking them to designate the company Unitree as a Chinese military company. Unitree makes humanoid robots and robot dogs. Some of its products are currently used in American law enforcement and army operations, but the gear can be used for surveillance. The most concerning, lawmakers say, is its remote digital access. Each robot is connected through the cloud with data going back to the Chinese regime. Chairman of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party said, quote, every single member of the committee, Democrats and Republicans, signed this letter because we all see the risk. Beijing is quietly embedding itself in our critical systems. We must act now to ban and blacklist Unitree before it's too late. A new peak in streaming for Paramount Global. Worldwide, the entertainment giant totaled 79 million subscribers for Paramount Plus in the first quarter. That's up 11% year over year, and the studio posted a loss of $109 million in streaming, a vast improvement from the previous quarter, which was more than double that. Company executives reiterated that its streaming business is still on track to reach domestic profitability this year. At the same time, executives noted that it's working on reducing non-content costs. This is in response to broader economic uncertainty, which they said could threaten overall consumer spending. An Italian company that runs an online price comparison service says it's suing Google for more than $3 billion over market dominance. Here's more.
Italy's Multiply Group said on Friday that it was suing Google for $3.3 billion. It's seeking damages for alleged abuse of Google's dominant market position, as previously recognised by the EU Court of Justice. Multiply operates the popular Italian price comparison website trovaprezzi.it. In a statement, it said its claim argues that Google's actions hindered the growth of its subsidiary, 7pixel, between 2010 and 2017. Instead, it said favouring Google Shopping. An Italian news outlet said the claim was filed at a Milan court. A Google spokesperson declined to immediately comment. The European Commission fined Google in 2017 for using its own price comparison shopping service to gain an unfair advantage over smaller European rivals. In September, the company lost a final appeal against the $2.7 billion fine.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said today she would only go to the White House for a solution on trade tariffs. The EU leader was reacting to a question related to President Trump calling her a fantastic person.
I had good conversations with President Trump on the phone and at the funeral of the Pope. But for me, it's important that if I go to the White House, I want to have a package we can discuss. So it has to be concrete, and I want to have a solution that we both can agree on. That is the work we're doing right now.
Von der Leyen was speaking at a joint press conference in Brussels with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Merz says he congratulated President Trump on reaching a trade agreement with the United Kingdom, but warned that similar deals with individual European nations won't be possible. He emphasized that EU member states have fully delegated trade policy to the European Union, meaning any future deal must be negotiated with Brussels, not individual countries. Merz also raised concerns about rising national debt across the globe, including in the United States, calling the trend troubling. With petroleum-based dyes getting the axe, natural alternatives are taking root. The FDA has approved 3 new color alternatives as safe for use in food products and has expanded the range of natural source colors available to manufacturers. Cleared for blue are Galdieria extract blue and butterfly pea flower extract. The first is derived from a microalgae and the other from the plant's petals. The third, calcium phosphate, imparts a white color. This comes as the Human and Health Services Department has set the goal to phase out all petroleum-based dyes by the end of next year. U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials say agents confiscated more than 200 counterfeit watches at Chicago's O'Hare Airport on Sunday. They included fake Rolex Submariners, Omega Speedmasters, and other high-end models that sell for thousands of dollars. The CBP says if the watches were authentic, the shipment would have a retail value of more than $6 million. Customs officials say the shipment arrived from China and was to be delivered to an address in Bensenville, in Illinois. In April, agents intercepted 145 shipments of counterfeit watches from Hong Kong and China. The CBP says American consumers fall victim to knockoff goods costing more than $100 billion every year. And young users are swiping left on Match Group. That's forcing the online dating app company to cut 13% of its workers. Profit fell to $117 million in the first quarter for the owner of Tinder, Hinge, and OkCupid. Paid users dropped 5% from a year ago, which dented revenue. Paying users fell on Tinder, the company's biggest brand, but paying users increased on Hinge. The dating app company has been struggling to attract young users. Chief Executive Spencer Raskoff said the cuts affect 325 employees and will reduce management layers. Around 1 in 5 managers will be impacted. Raskoff said the cuts would result in more than $100 million of annual savings. And joining us now to discuss the antitrust case against Google is Patrick Hedger, NetChoice Director of Policy. So Patrick, good afternoon to you. The closing arguments are today. What's at stake? Talk to us, with the U.S. wanting to break up Google, not just for the company itself, but for the tech industry and consumers more broadly.
Yeah, so where we are right now is sort of the sentencing phase of a very long process, and this process will continue to be appealed as well. But what we're looking at right now is that the Department of Justice is effectively seeking the equivalent of a prison sentence for what is no more than a traffic violation. And so we have the Department of Justice pursuing very draconian remedies, as they call them, against Google related to Google's deals with Apple for placement of Google search within the iOS operating system, including the Safari browser. And what they are seeking to do to Google is break off huge portions of the company. And so what they're seeking is entirely disproportionate to the underlying core of the case.
Where do you stand on the government's position that we need to level the playing field in search and AI?
Yeah, the market is already doing that. What we found and we heard actually in this trial is that queries on Apple through Google are down because we see the market is increasingly shifting towards alternatives to general search. Most people, when they're searching for products, actually start their search on Amazon. And increasingly, we're seeing people that are doing general search for knowledge and also shopping are using generative AI such as ChatGPT or Grok on X. And so the market is already diversifying in this space. And it shows that antitrust tends to be a lagging indicator of where markets actually are.
But Patrick, let me get your thoughts on this. What do you say to the argument that Google has leveraged its dominant position in internet search, to suppress competition by entering into exclusive default search agreements with major device makers and browsers? That's like Apple, Samsung, Mozilla as well. And mind you, these agreements often involving multi-billion-dollar payments to ensure that Google search is pre-installed and default on widely used platforms like Safari, Chrome, and Android-based devices.
Yeah, the counterfactual to that is somebody else would be paying for that placement. You perhaps have Microsoft entering into those agreements as well. And we saw that has happened before where platforms have swapped Google out and allowed for placement of a different search service as the default. And they end up switching back because consumers prefer Google. And even the judge in this case has said Google has had the superior product for the last few decades. So, but again, to the idea that there's no way to disrupt this industry because of these deals, during this trial, ChatGPT launched and is already disrupting Google's business model to the extent that they have had to launch their own AI services as well, Gemini, and incorporate that into search. And what the DOJ is seeking to do here would limit Google's ability to compete in the AI space and integrate AI investments into its products going forward. So this is really a boon for Google's competitors, but it's not necessarily better for the consumer.
And do you agree, with forcing Google to share some user data, perhaps, in search with competitors to help new players? Any harm in that?
Just as the judge has acknowledged that consumers have chosen Google, they've chosen Google because there's an element of trust there. When you type in a search query, sometimes people are searching for really sensitive things, particularly maybe related to their healthcare. And so the idea that has to be open to be shared with any consumer or, any potential competitor that comes and asks for it is a huge problem for consumer privacy. And I can't understand why the government is pursuing something like this. Especially when foreign companies could be the ones that are coming and asking for access to Google's user data. So this is a really bad, antitrust law is supposed to be about protecting consumers, and this particular ask from the Department of Justice would very much so put consumers at risk.
So from what you're saying, I'm just wondering to myself here, Patrick, are there more pressing matters for the department to tackle? Maybe the DOJ should be focusing on issues like fraud, scam, maybe even foreign threats, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as we know, the Chinese are still in America's telecommunications system. There was a big hack that is ongoing right now. We have issues. It's certainly related to fraud and abuse that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has reported those numbers are up year over year in the last few years. These are the things that we really ought to be focusing on, especially, again, as the market is showing that Google has to be responsive to competitive pressures here. They're being responsive to ChatGPT. They're being responsive to other generative AI products. And increasingly, they're facing advertising competition, not just from Meta, but also Amazon as well. Google's revenue in some of its advertising businesses has actually been down the last few quarters. That's not the sign of a monopoly.
And just one more thing, Patrick. President Trump has said before that China is afraid of Google. So can you talk to us about, could breaking up Google actually hand an advantage to Chinese state-backed tech firms? How real is the risk there?
I think it's a huge risk because what you see is in technology, it's really important to have scale, right? And when we're talking about the internet, big is really important. There are things like economies of scale and network effects, and these companies have the ability to make major investments in really difficult technologies, AI being one of them, but one we haven't talked about yet is quantum computing, and Google has been a major leader in quantum computing, which would be revolutionary going forward. And Google has also made major investments in firms like Waymo, which is self-driving cars, and that's fundamentally robotics technology, which is an area where the United States is actually not leading China, but is actually a little bit behind China in the area of robotics. We don't want to see that happen with AI and quantum computing as well.
Well, Patrick, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let's talk about markets quickly before we go here. U.S. stocks ended flat to slightly lower today, capping a quiet week as investors awaited U.S.-China trade talks set for the weekend in Switzerland. So energy led sector gains on rising oil prices while healthcare lagged, and the Fed kept rates steady this week but warned of growing risks from tariffs. Trade news also included a U.S.-UK deal and India's offer to narrow its tariff gap with the U.S. And that is it today on Business Matters.